Pope Leo what?
Quote, if that quote is correct.
What was the
Hold on
quote
one
from
second.
Pope Leo? Which Pope Leo? The one clear back in Martin Luther's day? John probably knows the quote from Pope Leo. He knows about everything else.
Which, no, I don't.
I think
I
Pope,
probably do, but I just can't remember.
yeah, right. I mean, now he's looking for it in his dictionary. Well, I guess I'll. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Dr. Jackson.
Aha. Hi, Sister Sherry. Nice to not see you today.
Nice to see you.
I can't see you. Put on your camera. Let's see what you look like today.
Oh, no. No way.
Oh, no. The Bearded Wonder is on here today. The Bearded Wonder, Scott Paddock.
Oh, wow.
Now, listen. Cook, you're going to have to be specific here. You
About
see
what?
who's on here with you today?
Who?
R. Scott Paddock.
Ooh, how you doing, Scott?
Oh my gosh. Good. He can't hear us.
He can't hear us at all. Well, we're in the spirit, so if he's in the flesh.
Yeah, right. He's Jewish. He's in the flesh.
Oh man, I've never met you, Scott. So, how you doing?
Scott is an expert in, I would have to say, rabbinical lore. And now you see he's turned up here today, so you're going to have to watch what you say because he's like a walking compendium of everything Jewish. He probably even knows when Jesus grew his first nose hair.
I was going to say pubic hair, but
No. I was thinking about that. But
of course you were.
okay, well, I'm going to go out and take a Lasix break real quick. So why don't you go
Daddy's
ahead
on here.
and get started? I think we're recording, yeah. Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
All right, well, everyone, how's everybody doing?
Good.
I've got my daughter here answering my questions. Today's forum, we're going to just discuss a little bit about, this was kind of about the Jewish traditions, the Jewish lineage, and what, if anything, should a Yahwist, a Gentile Yahwist,
What's the meeting numbers?
take from or cleave to those things, and if they do or don't, what does it mean, and should it, is it necessary, and different things like that. One of the first things that I ran into studying all this stuff out is, you have the big three. You realize that every tradition that was given, by the Gentile church is not correct. So then you start searching for truth. You immediately come across the big three, which are holidays, bacon, and Sabbath, right? And so it's my advice when you're talking to a regular run-of-the-mill, Gentile Christian, I don't even bring those three things up. I let them bring them up if that's what they want to, but I don't try to force those on them because I knew for a little while that I shouldn't be eating bacon, and I was still eating it. And it took me a while to stop for whatever reason. When we get trapped into those things, it just takes us a while to digest those, no pun intended. But so then, one of the big things for us was, Christmas. So I was getting convicted about Christmas. And so then we were at a place in my family where we were about to move. So we would not have a house in the month of December one year. We were going to stay with my parents before we moved. So I basically had a 2-year period from the last Christmas we did until that one year we didn't have Christmas, and then the following year to figure out what I was going to do. So at that point, I started looking into Hanukkah because basically my family has grown up doing something in December. There would be some sort of a void there that was hard to deal with, especially to me, a lot of women, maybe some men also, but a lot of women, it's like, hey, we had family, we had fun, we had friends, we had traditions, we had lights and all of these things. And now these things are getting taken away, blah, 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 blah.
And I just wanted to let you know that Scott Paddock's here.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
no.
Nice.
That just scares me to death. He's going to ruin everything.
So,
Oh, you think Rich could take care of him?
He'll take care of it.
All right.
I have confidence.
nice. So then I looked into Hanukkah and, just to see what it was all about. And I took the same approach with Hanukkah that I did with Christmas. I said, hey, if Christmas is just something that's not in the Bible, but it's just kind of grown out of tradition and there's nothing intrinsically evil or bad or wrong with it or pagan with it, then I will go ahead and continue to do Christmas. But if for whatever reason I search it out and find that I can't, with my convictions do it, then I won't. And so I came to that conclusion that with my convictions, I could not do it. So I took that same approach with Hanukkah, and I saw the story of Hanukkah. I saw the tradition of Hanukkah, which the tradition of the 8 days and the oil and all thing is a later invention, which I didn't know at first. But it was just stuff. There's some things that aren't great about Hanukkah on certain levels, but intrinsically it was a good story. The Jews revolted against Antiochus Epiphanes and said, we're not going to follow your laws. We're not going to uncircumcise ourselves. We're not going to forbid circumcision or forbid Sabbath. We're going to fight you and try to take this back to the homeland, et cetera, et cetera. So in the basic version of it, it was good. So I did that because of that, and because I wanted my family to not have a void where they had something. So there's nothing spiritual about Hanukkah or celebrating Hanukkah. It was simply for those reasons. But that led me to a larger question, because you get into certain Hebrew roots things, which I've never called myself Hebrew roots, but you get into certain Hebrew roots things, and everybody's dressing Jewish, or they've got the prayer shawl, or they're wearing the tzitzit, or they're doing certain Jewish traditions on Sabbath. And should they be doing them? Do you have to be doing them? Can you do them, or are you not supposed to do them? And all those questions arise. And then this week on the forum, on the Yahad think tank, Jeremy Leduc posted something which didn't get a lot of play. It only got one comment. He said, a friend who recently left a Messiah Point posted this, curious what Jackson and others think. And what was posted was this right here. I'll put it in the chat right here to everyone. And it was it's a blog about anti-missionaries and how rabbinical Judaism is legitimate Judaism, and here's why. I don't know if you guys were able to read that or not. To me, it was a poorly written article. It made a lot of assumptions and didn't, and it was a fundamentalist article. It was a fundamentalist apologetic, which to me, fundamentalism is not good because it causes you to have to check certain truth markers at the door. But that's not what we're talking about today. We can talk about that some other day. So then it just led to the larger question, and I was with Scott, who I've never met, was going back and forth about my the previous forum, in which I didn't have time to study it out, so I threw some unvetted sources out, some of them unvetted, and talking about the temple and all of that. So was the first temple legitimate? Was it supposed to be? Which I come from the standpoint of the documentary hypothesis, the JPD hypothesis, a version of that, not the actual JPD hypothesis, but a version of that the Tanakh, the Torah, prophets, and Psalms are not necessarily infallible or anything like that, but they are a collection of things. And I kind of do come from the Clementine homilies and recognitions, Peter's version, that not everything that was passed down to us is always correct. And I think that Deuteronomy 13 has a lot to say about that, and why the Father allows that. But anyway, so I would just be interested to hear, maybe Scott, I know that you're here for the first time, but you were the one that interacted a little bit on that last forum. And obviously, could you just give us a little bit of background on, because I don't know anything about you, on who you are and where you come from and what your stance is on some of this stuff and why you take that stance? I can't hear you right now. You don't have any audio?
Yeah, we shut him all off so he couldn't be heard.
Oh, okay.
No, something's wrong there on his end.
Can you see him?
Yeah, we could see him.
Yeah, he muted, then he unmuted, so he's not muted right now. Hey, Scott, it would give me no greater joy than to me talk the whole time and you not be able to respond, and you just flip out like a hamster in a cage, trying to correct my wrongs, but you can't.
I would be particularly interested in hearing some about Shabbat, because we've got kind of a dispute in our group right now, what is Torah and what is not.
I think it's the difference between Hillel and Shammai.
Those are rabbis, though.
I know. What were their premises?
Those are great ones.
Yeah.
Trouble with my microphone. Okay. You know what? I think, Scott, I think Zoom did an update or something, because I had to go into my settings and change it. Maybe if you get out, when I first started it up, it asked me something about my microphone and I ignored it, and then my microphone didn't work. So maybe if you want to exit out and try to hop back on.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So we can just even carry on a little bit. To me, I think there are a couple of things going on with Jews and Judaism in general that a lot of people don't know about. I look at as negatives, but some people might look at them as positives, and they were the ones that, carried on a tradition. And even though it might not be perfect or mandated or anything like that, that you should follow it and we should do it because they're the ones that were given, it was prophesied that, the northern tribes would be scattered, they would remain intact and know who they were, and the northern tribes wouldn't. And then and they're the ones that are going to keep the Tanakh safe, et cetera, the Torah safe. And then, so we should do just what they do. I don't subscribe to that, because I feel like if I believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, then he's the one that's the head of that now. And then the group that rejected the Messiah they would be, that's the first tenet. I'm going to send someone from among your brothers, the prophet who is like Moses. You must listen to him. So, when he's going back and forth with these guys in the first century, they were taking cues from him and not necessarily from them, from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century, et cetera, that had rejected him. That's not to say that all Jews rejected him either. It's just to say that the biggest monopoly of Jewish religion right now is Orthodox Judaism. So since they're the biggest, they want to exert their power from a fundamentalist standpoint and say, we are Judaism. So I don't know, while we're waiting for Scott, does anyone have any comments on, just from your standpoint, what do you do in your walk with Yah that is strictly Jewish, regardless of, whether or not it's prescribed? Does anybody do anything? I mean, like some people light candles on Sabbath, like on a Erev Shabbat, like the eve before Sabbath or whatever. Which is something that I don't do. I don't do the Arabs. I do a different, even a different thing there. Scott, is your mic working? No, it's not. Ah, dang it.
Sign language.
Sign language? I heard sign language.
Sign language. What the word?
Oh, wow.
Saved. Saved by a mechanical problem.
Hey, Providence.
No, he'll tell us straight if he can get on. I wish there was some way we could get on his computer and take a look. I think we could probably fix it up in no time.
You could. He would have to download Team Viewer, and so would you. Team Viewer.
Well,
Turn your mic, turn his camera around and show us the screen.
yeah, that's an idea. And it looks like a built-in camera.
Oh.
Wait a minute.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Your wish is his command. That's a handsome guy right there.
Did you check with the sound settings? There are two sound settings. There's one in your computer with your operating system, and there's one with Zoom. They've got to be set on the same thing. That's what always happens to me. I have them set on different things, and then I have to fool around every time I get on Zoom to try to get them both on the same. Yeah, you can hear. Well, I have a question for you while we're
For who?
waiting.
For me?
Well, yeah, for you or anybody. There's a Torah directive concerning the Shabbat. And as you said, there are certain traditions that are used. You can hear, okay. Certain traditions that some people use. That we used to do the Erev Shabbat and all that stuff, baying at the moon and everything.
Nice.
But then, as we went on and learned that
That was Babylonian.
Practiced by the Nazarenes,
Right.
the Enochians, and Hanukkah was not practiced by the Enochians for obvious reasons. So we have a little dispute now in the Yahad in regards to what is the Shabbat command. I say that it's what the Torah says in the commandments. We have another party that says it's not what the Torah commands as much as it is what Nehemiah commands. Nehemiah says something to the effect of, you can't go outside the walls of Jerusalem because there are Arabs out there selling stuff, and you don't want to suborn the Sabbath of Yahweh by buying and selling from Arabs.
Also,
yeah.
also Amos 8.
Yeah. What's that say?
It says that on their new moons and Sabbath, that they'll buy the needy for a parish. When the Sabbath would be over, they'll be buying and selling on the Sabbath.
Okay, well, my question is, do we need to have a dispute? I would be a minimalist in this. I would say that more people would probably go with the minimum Torah recommendation here or commandment than going with the decree of a governor, no matter who that governor was.
Yeah, I think yes. So there's two things going on here in my mind. One is prescriptive versus descriptive, and I've said this before. Certain things are prescribed in the Tanakh, and certain things are described as what they did. So anytime something that's described as to what they did doesn't necessarily mean it's prescribed that you must do it.
Well, see, in Nehemiah, there's no mention of a word from Yahweh or anything like that.
Well, that was the second thing. I would say that Nehemiah, and I would include Ezra in that, because Ezra gave some commands that to me are fallacious. And it does not say that thus says Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. It says, I'm telling you to do this. So he's prescribing it as though it must be done, but there is no Torah command that it should be done. So I am, in myself, because again, I don't look at the Tanakh as infallible or even inerrant, but I do look at it as a history and a guideline, and some of it from the mouth of Yahweh is inerrant. But Nehemiah and Ezra are prescribing something that must be done, but it does not say, "Thus saith Yahweh." So yeah, I look at those very much with suspicious eyes.
I'm going to put up a poll, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
While you're talking, I'll put up a poll about this because we're supposed to debate this here pretty soon. And it would be nice to know what, generally we got 13, 14 people here. It'd be nice to know what people think. So I'll do that.
Okay. Yeah. And I was just talking about when I was describing to my kids this morning when we had Sabbath devotions, we were going to go through James, Yaakov, and then I was giving them kind of the history of Yaakov, and he's the brother of Yeshua. He's the brother of Jude. Oh, by the way, Jude mentions Enoch. Enoch is in some Bibles as canon. It's not in ours because we're protesting Catholics, et cetera, et cetera. I'm kind of going through this whole, or we were raised protesting Catholics, and so that's why we have what we have. How the Tanakh was formed, who it was formed for, talking about the Septuagint, et cetera, et cetera. And when you kind of get into all that, you can see the slant that's, that there's certain slants, with what you have passed down. But yeah, I think it's a good question. What out of the Tanakh are we, I've got my YouTube channel up for anybody who wants to know. And I put on there what the Torah and Tanakh directive is for who to listen to the most and who to listen to second and third and all of that. That's important. It's crazy to me that someone would take a sentence from Paul or a directive from Ezra or Nehemiah when neither one of those guys are on the first or second level of who you're supposed to listen to, and make some doctrine that they're not going to fellowship with others because they won't do this thing from Paul or Ezra or Nehemiah. Those guys are low on the list of powerful players according to the Father, not according to me, according to the Father. So I think, to me, what cleared my mind up of having to do this, or what do I need to do, or what's more important, is that teaching I do, not because I think I'm so special, but because that helped me so much in delineating what's important and what's not. Anybody have any comments on that, or questions? Everybody's silent. I know Scott wants to say something, but he can't. He's the only one that wants to say something but can't. But so yeah, I think that I know Jackson's making this poll now, but you have to understand that everybody talking in the Bible proper, in the canon proper, is not infallible. Infallible, it doesn't even really mean anything, really. They're not inerrant in the sense of the only one that's inerrant, that is without error, is Yeshua. And even then, we have books that have been found throughout history that purport to tell the words of Yeshua, and they obviously don't have the words of Yeshua. It's obvious that it is not authentic. So even everything that says Yeshua said this doesn't mean that he actually said that either. So while he isn't going to cause you to err, there are certainly books in his name that will cause you to err. And you can look at some of those things. You can look at some of the things that were brought up from Dead Sea Scrolls, from Nag Hammadi, from different monasteries and chapels around, and some of them purport to say the words of Yeshua, and that doesn't have the ring of truth to them. But you look at some other things that have his words that are not in the canon proper, or speak about him, thinking of Enoch, thinking of the Clementines, thinking of Second Esdras, thinking of Ecclesiasticus, things like this, that have some words that have the ring of truth to them and marry a lot of the things that we see in the canon proper. So you have to come at it with a heart that is pointed towards truth. If you come at it with an apologetics heart, where you want to defend a certain position or you want to defend a certain tradition, I think that you are automatically in error. Even if that tradition or that position, denominational or otherwise, is correct, if you come at it with from the wrong starting place, I think that you will ultimately err, because you have to come at it from a legitimate seeking Yah, and you can even still err from that point. You can say, hey, I want to do this for Yah, and then mess up. No, you can't get up here. And so it's important that you come at it from a directive of, I mean, I questioned everything. The only thing I've never questioned is the Father, the Creator. I've questioned, is Yeshua the Messiah? And I've went down that path, and I've looked at his words. I've taken, in context, his words from what we have as, the Greek Matthew. And that is a Torah follower who wants to lead people to the Father. He says as much. He says he's not doing away with Torah. He's correcting traditions. He's trying to get people back to the basics, to not lose their first love, looking even in Revelation and seeing his words there. So I think that, I've even questioned that. So to me, to defend a position or defend a tradition just for the sake of defending it apologetically is cause for error. It's going to cause you to err. We got a poll up here. What is required on the Shabbat for us today? The commandments of Exodus 20 and Leviticus 23, or those plus the descriptions of the Shabbat found in Ezra and Nehemiah, and or plus the words of 12 prophets directed to Israel or Judah, and or plus the practices found in the various acts, and or plus the Jewish traditions such as command to light the candles, and or something else.
How do you vote on this?
You just click it and then press submit. You probably can't vote.
Click an option with a radio button.
Yeah.
I don't have.
Well, I do.
that.
I've got radio buttons. Does everybody have the ability to vote?
I don't have it.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have the ability to vote. They must not want to hear your voice because you created it.
Already voted.
So, I mean,
surprising outcome so far.
Well, I would not choose any of those.
The commandments of Exodus 20 and Leviticus 23?
I would have chosen if you said the commandments of Exodus 20, probably, even though that wouldn't have been exactly what I would have said. But adding Leviticus 23, which is a strongly priestly source, I'm suspect of it.
Well, I only added on there as a second thought.
Well, you've just plumb pushed me out of the poll.
You got.
I am anathema. I am
what's the closest
from the poll.
I wanted to see if you could add to the poll the rules found in Jubilees.
Jubilee?
And or something else, I guess I would be. I'm something else.
I'd like to know what that something else is for sure.
Well, it's the divine word.
How come I don't get to vote?
Because
it's not fair.
This isn't a poll makerocracy. That's why.
It says there's 13, and I'm evidently number 14 here. Oh, well, I choose the top one.
Man, Scott, I was really wanting to hear you talk.
Me too. We got to do this next week.
I choose the top.
Okay. What about you, Lee?
You know what I believe. What
Top
would I
one.
choose?
You choose the top one.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm suspect of all of Leviticus, every single word in it. There's a few things that you can tell are pulled from a different source, from an original source, but man, there's just so much in there that sounds like.
Well, I am really surprised that only one person so far has added the descriptions of Shabbat found in Ezra and Nehemiah.
Well, where's the results of the poll? I don't see that.
Well, it's still going on. 8 of 14 have voted.
I can't turn my sound down enough not to.
What about you, Allison? Are you still there, or did she leave?
No, I'm here.
What's your thoughts on everything in general?
Well, I try to play it safe.
Yeah.
there's things that I really believe, but there's things I observe just to make sure. I mean, it can't hurt. I don't think, as long as you're not causing anybody else some misery.
Sure.
You know? And if you do have to do something on a Shabbat when you feel like everyone else is saying you shouldn't, you know, if you're helping somebody, then I think it's okay.
Amen.
Okay, so how about shoot, I lost my mind there, but I'm surprised there's nobody on here for Jewish traditions. So far, 10 people have voted out of 16. Evidently, we picked up a couple people here.
And another thing to notice in the command, and this was something that I picked up early on from somebody, is that the word is to observe, or you know, the Hebrew is to keep, to watch, to preserve. You know, shamar is the root. Observe the Sabbath. So if I have to do something on the Sabbath that I don't like because of an emergency or something like that, I'm still observing that it's the Sabbath, and I'm not liking that I'm having to do it, rather than just throwing caution to the wind and doing whatever I want to do. And I think that's important, to be able to observe it when you can't keep it proper. Does that make sense? You know, if there's an emergency, like Yeshua says, pulling your sheep out of the ditch or something like that, you're still observing that it's a Sabbath, and you would rather not be doing this. And you certainly didn't plan on, you know, hey, I'm going to throw my sheep in the ditch on the Sabbath so I can pick it out. It was an accident that happened, but you're observing that you're having to do it on the Sabbath. And that.
All right, let me add a little clarity on that. I think I have most of the last 20 years, I've done the majority of my work on the Shabbat, because that's what I do for a living. And when people say, well, ministry, you know, that's not working, that's ministry. The heck, it's not working. It's a lot of work. But I should have put on here the injunction that Yeshua talks about, the Levites are absolved from such things because they're doing their work primarily on the Shabbat.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm
that.
part of that class.
So you feel like, well, I mean, he's talking about the priests in the temple. You feel like you're a part of that class?
Definitely. Well, who are the Levites today? There's no temple, but there are still Levites. In the first century, you know, there were Levites all over the place, ministering in people's homes and in synagogues and everywhere else outside of Jerusalem. Even in the Acts, it says a lot of the poor priests. What priests would those be but Zadokite priests? They come into the movement, and they're priests and Levites.
But I'm not one of those, even if I'm doing the work of some of them in the sense of pastoral shepherding work. I, like Allison says, I play it safe. I'm not trying to get somebody's. Well, yeah, that's. Oof.
I've been doing this for like 40 years this year, so I don't know how in the world I can keep a Sabbath like a lay person when I have to work so darn hard on Shabbat. Not so much anymore, but in the past.
Sure. No, I agree with that. We just moved here to Tennessee, but obviously when we were in Oregon, we did a weekly Shabbat meeting, and, you know, it caused us to have to work, but we did as much work as we could on Friday. And then on the Shabbat, we would do the minimal amount of work, but my whole family was, you know, helping to get it ready. So yeah, I see what you're saying there. I come at it more from the perspective of, you know, I'm not going to, you know, assert that I am some sort of Gentile Levite that needs your tithe or this or that. If you want to give an offering to me, I will accept it, but I'm not demanding.
Well, sure, but you can't belittle yourself either in what you do. So
does the leaders take another day off besides that day that you're working with that
the venerable day of the sun?
You would have to take day of the sun. What doesn't matter what day it is. If you can take a weekday off, but if you have a job, imagine like you do, Rich, you would take a Sunday off.
I'm
Yeah.
just a chucara. I'm just stirring the pot.
Well, when it was when I was doing Sunday work, yes, I took Shabbat off.
On a Monday.
Yes, me too,
On
and I
Sunday,
loved it.
Saturday, I took it off, and sometimes you're called in to duty for one thing or the other.
Bring your
Yeah, when I stopped being a pastor, I lamented the fact that I was going to lose my Sabbaths. I had my Sabbath on Shabbat, and then I did my work on the first day of the week, which was great. Yah doesn't care if you meet on the first day of the week. He really doesn't. He cares if you don't take the Sabbath. He gives certain. Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to mention a verse here in relation to this topic. It's John 5.
Talking.
What's the verse? It's verse 17, I believe.
John 5.
Verse 16 and 17. It says, "And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. But he answered them, My Father worketh hitherto, and I work." So it seems to say that, his father and him are working on Sabbath. So this question of, what counts as the commands for the Sabbath, if you take Exodus 20 where it says do no work, of course to observe it and keep it and guard it.
Do no regular work, yeah.
There's an angle to that too, Desmond.
Well,
Right.
The angle is that there were 4 calendars going at that time. He wouldn't have been on the same Sabbath as either the Sadducees or the Pharisees.
On the same Sabbath?
No, they weren't the same Sabbath.
I would need to see evidence of that.
Okay.
Well, the reason we keep the Sabbath we do today is because we say it carried on and was never broken. So, they probably were keeping the Sabbath if the calendar were on it, right?
Well, here's what they did. The Sadducees, clear back the 2nd century BC, went to the lunisolar calendar, and in the 1st century they were on the lunisolar calendar, and the Pharisees were on observance calendar, and they started on Friday night. But back in the old temple days, it's evident through the ancient texts that the Sadducees' day was not necessarily on the 7th day. It was the 7th day from a new moon or whatever they used.
Well, please post that.
Oh, yeah, I have all that stuff.
Yeah, I would first of all wonder why Yeshua didn't just come out and say that point blank then. That would be my first.
The redaction of the Gospels. Who redacted this stuff? People that didn't know what they were.
And number 2 is we have calendars back pretty far. So I think, and it might even be what's his name that can marry the calendars. That I mentioned last time, Velikovsky. I don't think we're off on the Shabbat. I think we're on it correctly.
Now the Sadducees were not. Now all you need to go back is to the Jewish dictionary under calendar, and it will tell you that. The Jewish dictionary, the big fat thing. That's the first.
No, I know. I've got it up right now.
All right, go look at the.
Well, I'm going to look at that later.
Yeah,
One of the reasons I
later.
have it up is, and I was going to mention this. I know we've got off a little bit, but Scott, I was going to mention a couple of things, and hopefully maybe we can get your mic working this week, and then next Shabbat we could do something. Is it going to be at a different time next week, Jackson?
1 o'clock, yes.
1 p.m. Eastern instead of 2 p.m. So we're going to switch this from 2 p.m. Eastern to 1 p.m. Eastern. Certain people have local Shabbat gatherings, and it's causing them to not be able to make this. They want to make it, so we're going to move it ahead 1 hour from now on. So mark your calendars, and maybe we'll throw something up in the Yahad think tank about that. I
wanted to add something to my previous comment. I was mentioning that, he said that thing about how his father and he work on the Sabbath. Whether or not that's the real Sabbath, that can be debated. But then if you look at Exodus 20 about do no work, well, then you have to define what is work.
Yes.
Now, the way I've normally looked at it is, regardless of whether you have regular work or servile work or whatever that argument is, because I don't quite understand it completely. But maybe, all the prophets and all these other writings and stuff are just defining for us what work is. Because when you think about it practically, there's a limitless, an infinite amount of things that could be considered work, because you could do, an infinite amount of different things, whether you just want to kick acorn down the road or go build a house. I mean, there's so many, you can't mention them all. So maybe, all these prophets and everybody that did follow God, that did follow his ways, were telling us the truth when they gave us these expoundings upon what work really is, by saying don't buy and sell, assuming that, you would be working, or to say, don't go kill an animal, or, this or that, or fast, or, whatever it could be. Maybe they're all just expounding on this idea of what work is, since it doesn't seem to be explicitly defined in the Torah as far as I can tell, or at least it's very confusing to extract.
Sure. One of the things that I look at is, am I scheduling it, and is it my regular work? That's the primary thing there. Am I scheduling it on the Shabbat on purpose for whatever reason? And is it my regular work? Or is it not my regular work? Like, for instance, I'll give one which I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with. There are times on the Shabbat when my wife wants to go shopping for like the weekly shopping. The reason she wants to do it is because she wants to get away from the kids and relax. So I say, go do it, because you're not doing it because you have to. It's something that if you have to take the kids, it's going to drive you crazy. It's going to get you out of here and relax your mind and give you some free time. I will watch the kids for you. So I have no problem with it. I'm sure some people would, and they think that's anathema or whatever. I get it. But so to me, I'm pretty loose on it, but I'm also in some ways strict on it. I mean, if I won't let, no laundry can be done. We're not cleaning unless we have to clean something for a Sabbath gathering. There's no, there's a lot of things that I will not let do, which maybe somebody else would let do and not see it as some big deal, but there's no way that they would ever go shopping on the Sabbath. Now, I wouldn't go shopping for groceries on the Sabbath. Why? Because to me, that would be work, and I would hate it. And I would be like, why am I working on the Sabbath? But for my wife, it gets her away. It gives her some time away from the kids. And so to me, that's the whole purpose of the Sabbath. So I would let her do that. But I can't put that conviction on you, and you can't put your conviction on me. We don't have a list that says, well, we do have a small list, but again, we don't have a list that says exactly what you can or can't do. Of course, you cannot, and everybody knows this, you can't watch or listen to your Amazon Kindle Fire on the Sabbath. No laughs? I don't get a laugh from that?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that was bad.
Oh, well. So yeah, you've got to play it by ear. There are certain times when I felt like, hey, I'm going to do this on the Sabbath. And then as I got closer to doing it, I just felt really convicted that I shouldn't do it. So I didn't do it, or maybe I did do it and I felt bad about it and I repented later, or whatever it is. But I will say also that it's very easy to get loosey-goosey with it and start not doing or doing certain things. I was just talking to some people that we know, and they know some of these truths about certain things, and they haven't, kind of got all the way into it. But, Sabbath was something that was a little easier for them. But then they made a move, and then they let it slip a little bit, and they started doing more and more stuff on Sabbath. And I was just mentioning something to them about Sabbath, and they, kind of got convicted, like, yeah, we've let that slip. And they really kind of felt like, I didn't say this out loud, but it felt like they wanted to kind of rein that back in again. And I think it's always healthy to every few months or weeks to go over and say, okay, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Are we doing this? What can we do better? I don't think that's unhealthy at all. I think that's very healthy. But any other questions on any of this? I know this didn't go the way we wanted it to. I had a couple of things I was going to say, and I was going to let Scott talk and then maybe bounce some things off of him and see where he goes. I'm pretty conservative when it comes to doing things just because they were Jewish or passed down into tradition. I don't just necessarily do them, but at the same time, I'm not going to not do something just because. Okay, so the host is sharing poll results. 73% say the commands of Exodus 20 and Leviticus 23. 18% say plus Shabbat found in Ezra and Nehemiah. That's interesting. Who voted for that? Who voted for that second one or the third one?
Second one.
Ezra and Nehemiah.
Yeah.
That was me.
That was who?
That was me, Desmond.
Okay, Desmond.
Yeah. Well, I just see Ezra and Nehemiah are men that followed God, and they were seeking after his ways. So if that's what they went for, and, I can only assume that they're going to be in the kingdom, then, why not?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the why not would be because just because somebody's seeking the Father doesn't mean everything they say is correct. You can't just automatically assume that.
Well, like I was saying before, I can see how buying and selling might be considered work. Like you were saying, people go to work to make money. So on the other side, where I was talking about leaving the city of Jerusalem, well, I kind of see Jerusalem as there's the new Jerusalem, up in heaven. That's the real Jerusalem. And we're not there yet, but when we are there, I don't think we'll be leaving for Sabbath.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be leaving for Sabbath either. I don't know that that has anything to do with the command he was saying, though. Let me ask you this. Do you think that someone who's not following Ezra and Nehemiah is in sin?
Not necessarily. I think, the Spirit moves in everybody and convicts them as they're, as it comes up or the time is right or whatnot. So to each their own as far as how the Holy Spirit convicts them. But I don't, necessarily think, just because it wasn't in Exodus 20 that we shouldn't do it, because, what does that commandment mean? Do no work. That there's so many different interpretations on that. So I'm not going to throw out the prophet's interpretations.
Well, you do have, yes, but the prophet has to agree with the Torah. That's what that's what the YouTube channel, the first one I posted, is all about. The prophet can't just say whatever. He has to agree with Torah. And it says, don't let anyone take away or add to this. And specifically, the Father says that. So while you can have a prophet say something in a different way, or maybe it's going to include a certain situation, which is possible with Ezra and Nehemiah. There you go. I hear you.
Hey, I finally got it figured out. It was in my computer.
There we go.
There you go. But just real quick, Desmond, a prophet can, he can describe something differently, or if there's a different situation comes up and he's trying to pair something with something, I get that. And maybe that's how you see Ezra and Nehemiah. And I would, obviously you have to do the convictions you have, but I would just be wary to say that any prophet that said anything, it has to be tested, and we're required to test it. So,
hey, by the way, there's no real time constraint here. So, if you want to put Scott on now that he's got it figured out.
All right, Scott.
Oh, wait a minute. Here's Lee's got a comment here.
Okay.
Okay. I was with.
Moto E5 play. Can you mute yourself?
I was a Jewish girl. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but there's some feedback. I was trying to get the guy who's on the Moto E5 to mute.
She would hear something to do into Shabbat as far as to do,
Mute.
and she would jump on it and do it until she found out that it was not to be done. But she would come at the commandment from a point of obedience. Some people look at the commandments and say, well, unless they prove that I'm supposed to do it, I won't do them. She would come at it from a place of obedience and then back off from the commandment at that point. So I respected that quite a bit. So kind of that's what I look at also. Come at the commandment from a place of obedience. You understand what I'm saying?
That she thinks is obedience.
Yes, but she would come at there. It wouldn't be against Torah if she did the commandment, but she would be able to back off if she found out it was not.
To add to what he was just saying right there, it says in the Torah to be careful to obey all his commands.
All right, lay down the law.
So if you're being careful, then, wouldn't you want to err on the side of caution that maybe these things might be work?
Well, if he sends me to hell for what I've been doing on the Shabbat, then I deserve to be there. That's the way I see it. I mean, I've not, I've been alive this long, keeping the Shabbat insofar as I knew how. That's one of the things that we're disputing here. I've got somebody telling me now that unless I do what Nehemiah says and do what the prophet says, and that I am profaning the Shabbat. But then whatever time I have, I want to turn it over and see what Scott has to say. But that, Desmond, that is a very, very good question.
Yeah. Scott, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah, you got about 50 questions here going on at the same time. But as far as the Shabbat, here's how the Jewish viewpoint would be, is that there's 39 prohibitions based on building the Mishkan that apply to the Jews only. Those are prohibitions for halakhic Jews. Now, as far as Gentiles, and this is the Jewish point of view, that they should observe a Shabbat, but they don't have the 39 prohibitions placed upon them. And so it means that you still have to observe the Shabbat, but not all of the Torah commands apply to any one person. And so here's the problem that people do, is they're trying to say, I need to observe all the 613 mitzvot or commandments, but there's such an extreme lack of knowledge is which commandments apply to me as a Gentile. Am I in the land of Israel, out of the land of Israel? Am I a male or a female? Am I halakhically Jewish or not? And so there's where the confusion, and there's a lack of instruction as to what each thing would apply. Then you have the Jewish setting up of an eruv, in which you can do a lot of these things, but you can't, say, go more than 2,000 amot, which is about a half a mile from your home. So before your Shabbat, you set up those boundaries, and you're allowed to do a lot of things within the boundary, but not outside of them. And I know that's a huge subject in itself. You guys were talking about Ezra and Nehemiah and the additional commands. Here's something kind of to consider that's interesting in Nehemiah or Nehemiah chapter 10, and it's verse 34. It says, we cast lots among the Kohanim, the Leviim, and the people for the wood offering. Bring it to the house of our God after the houses of our fathers at the times appointed year by year to burn upon the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the Torah. But nowhere will you find the wood offering written in the Torah, because most of the commands they're implied, but you can go through all the Torah, and there's nowhere where it says that there's lots cast for the wood offering.
Temple scroll, if you want to consider that Torah.
Possibly it's in there, because see, I believe that the temple scroll is a Mishneh Torah, just as the book of Deuteronomy.
Yes.
So it's a Mishnah. It's considered oral Torah that's applicable.
Absolutely.
Except it's written down.
Yes, it's been written down. It's the same way people say, well, the Talmud, that's oral Torah. See, not all of the Talmud is oral Torah. Only portions of it are, and the rest is Gemara or commentary on it. So when I say oral Torah, a lot of people think Talmud or Mishnah or Tosafta. They think of things like that. But actually, the oral Torah is written down and contained within those writings, but not all of those writings are oral Torah. And the temple scroll is an early Mishnah. It's the earliest Mishnah, and the rabbis will all agree that it is.
Okay, so I have a question about that. So if, like you're saying, from the Orthodox Jewish perspective, because of course there's other versions of Judaism other than Orthodox Judaism.
Oh, absolutely.
And so Orthodox Judaism gets the biggest play because it's the biggest one. So by saying that, hey, a Yahwistic Gentile should observe Shabbat, but not necessarily all of the commands that are for a Jew,
Absolutely.
then what does that mean? And what I'm asking is this. They must observe Shabbat, but they don't have to observe all of them. To what end?
Yeah, how far do you go?
Not just how far do you go, but where does it take you? Meaning, let's say just from some random number, there's 17 of them that I'm supposed to observe, which I disagree with, but just for the sake of argument.
I understand.
So there's 17 of them I'm supposed to observe. I observe them correctly. Does that give me a place in quote unquote heaven, eternity with Yah? Or is that just for me to be okay here on earth with him and I'm not really going to go there because I'm a Gentile goy anyway?
Well, no. Maybe especially the school of Hillel, they taught that there was a place for the Gentiles.
That's right.
Whereas the school of Shammai Pharisees, they thought that you had to convert. And of course, that's a lot of what the book of Acts is about.
Right.
The argument of the school of Shammai issued edicts, but they weren't passed by the full Sanhedrin. But people were believing that they had to be. And so people, just like Shimon Keith or Peter, he goes into Cornelius and eats with him. But see, that's a prohibition by the school of Shammai that was never passed by the full Sanhedrin. But that was the big argument. Do we observe the laws of Shammai, who took things very literally and took it to the strictest level, where the school of Hillel said, no, there's a place for the Gentiles. There's commands that they must observe. And we're going to be more lenient.
So
the idea wasn't that Cornelius had to be eating kosher because a Jew can't eat unkosher. But the idea was that the school of Shammai said, no, you can't even go and eat, whether you eat kosher or not. So
then you believe that the book of Acts' version of Kepha and Cornelius is an event that happened and not an anti-Semitic literary device that the author of Acts uses?
No, it's actually showing that the people were following some of the edicts of the school of Shammai rather than what had been already discussed and viewed by the Sanhedrin. Of course, you had a huge number of Shammai school Parashim and Pharisees within those Sanhedrins at that time. And so the debate was, A, do we observe the school of Shammai, the edict, but yet it hadn't been approved by the full Sanhedrin. In other words, the edict never put into full effect, even though it was implied that you should. No, it's demonstrating what was going on at the time. That's quite the debate. Do you follow the sectarianism, or do you follow what the full Sanhedrin had approved all along? See, that's a problem with us is, we debate about calendars, try to recalculate. No, you might be more accurate in recalculating or observing moons or anything like that. But Sanhedrin made the decision to use the calculated calendar to keep the people. And if the Sanhedrin makes a mistake, there was already a provision in Torah for there to be an offering if the Snyder made a mistake, but the people aren't responsible provided they're following the final decision of the court. What keeps the people in unity, whether the Sanhedrin made a mistake on the calendar or not, which the new nation knows there's a problem with it, but until a Sanhedrin can meet again, they can make the changes, and all the Jewish people just obey the Hillel calendar.
Do you believe that the Sanhedrin holds authority today, spiritual authority?
Not spiritual authority, but they hold the decisions that the people are to obey and to work, and it was based on the final decisions of the Sanhedrin, which hasn't met since
So do you believe that a Messianic Jew should follow Sanhedrin edicts?
That's a tough question. If he's halakhically Jewish, yes. If he's a Gentile, then he should follow only those laws that apply to him. Still needs to learn the laws that apply to the Jews. So he can help the Jews fulfill.
So I think that what's happening here is the rabbinical movement is making up rules who really is a Jew and who isn't. And I guess they're talking about bloodline or converting when probably 80% of those who are Jews never had any Hebrew bloodline anyway. It just seems like us minim, us heretics, we either have to follow their guidelines for so-called Gentiles or not be Jews.
Moto E5 needs to mute again when you talk.
Yeah, well, I think we should follow the laws of the Sanhedrin because, the laws that I've checked out, when the Sanhedrin made a mistake, they almost always corrected it. Just like there was a lot of corruption in the Sanhedrin in the first century. But after the temple was destroyed, the Sanhedrin tried to meet. What do we do now? We can't make offerings at the temple. We can't make decisions. They can't issue any death sentences or anything because you must have a decision from the temple in order to carry out a death. You have to have a full Sanhedrin meeting. So they realized that they don't have the power that they did. What they did was they tried to make any corrections that they could. Last thing they did was set a temporary calendar until they could go back to full observance calendar to keep the people in unity. So their decisions were wise. They're not always perfect or correct, but we tend to have, as Gentiles, we tend to have a poor view of the Sanhedrin when really, I think they were out to do the very best thing they could do based on this. I really haven't found any terrible decisions by them that weren't later corrected.
Well, the point I'm making is that it's like the Pope in the Catholic Church. You follow a certain faith, and unless you're under certain supervision or in the umbrella of certain ones that make up their own rules, then you're really not. You're separated brethren. I think it's even worse with rabbinical movement in that I think even if Jesus Christ was here, he would not be considered for membership.
Right. I think that's a good point. Would Yeshua himself be a Jew according to the Sanhedrin and Rabbinic Judaism? And the obvious answer is no.
He would have been. Absolutely. He would have been.
Well, no, they've already excommunicated him. What do you mean he would have been? He's not. If you are a Manim, you were allowed to go to the synagogue. I mean, you just read Who Was a Jew by Schiffman. You were allowed to go to a synagogue at first, and then all of a sudden you couldn't do the reading. Then you had to stay in the back, and then you started getting persecuted, and you could not believe Yeshua was the Mashiach. So that's revisionist history on your part. They excommunicated anyone who was a believer that he was the Messiah.
Definition of
that didn't happen until the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135.
No, it happened before the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and it was finalized with Bar Kokhba when Bar Kokhba said, "You come fight with us." They did, and he said, "Oh, and you have to have me as the Messiah," and they rejected it, and that was the final straw. But it was already happening before then. They were already getting pushed out of the synagogue before 135.
True. Bar Kokhba's own letters say so.
Yeah. Well, Bar Kokhba was the final straw because ordinarily, whether you believed that Yeshua was the Messiah or not, you were just considered another sect of Jews. Obviously, for that time, there was a lot of breaks, and you can see the reason for Bar Kokhba doing that, because what was happening is you had Romans or Gentiles who were taking to convert to get information from the Jewish people for war strategy. And so it was hard to determine who was a genuine believer coming into the synagogues or who was there just to aid the Romans. And so that
Sure.
was a protectionist thing that they did, but they went too far.
Sure.
You know, how do you know spiritually where somebody really is? I mean,
Right. I mean, you're going off of the basic trust premise that you're not a heretic and you're not a deceiver, and you're genuinely telling me that you're following this, etc. But I mean, you know,
tough question.
Yeah, you would be the first to admit, though, that the history of Jews in general is not the same as the history of the tribe of Judah. Like, there have been attachments to the Jew, that what we now call Jews is not just the tribe of Judah. And I think that point is lost on a lot of people, that not only are what we now call the Jews the tribe of Judah plus the little bit of Benjamin and the Levites, but also remember in the histories of the Tanakh where it says some of the people who are in the northern kingdom who did not want to worship the bull that was set up came down into Jerusalem. And so there, that's your, I think, in my opinion, your primary argument for a one house view of Latter-day Israel. But also you have Hyrcanus and forcibly converting Samaritans and Edomites that ended up being his demise, because that's what brought the Herodians in to Judaism. And so all of these people are now meshed into this thing that we call Jews and Jewish. And so one of the big knocks that everybody had on Herod, I mean, at first they loved him because he was killing all their enemies, but then all of a sudden they realized he's still an Edomite in his heart, and he's doing these Edomite practices, but out in the front he's acting like he's really of the tribe of Judah proper, following the Torah, and he wasn't doing that. And so then that led to some of the things that we see in the Bible, and certainly some extra biblical things. Josephus describes it really well. But the point I'm making is that, so from the first century before Yeshua, the first century BC or BCE, you have what is considered Jewish is not Judah proper, is not even Israel proper. It is a mishmash of Judah proper, Israel proper, the Syrian Jewish Samaritan mix, and Edomites, which are the sworn enemies, all put into one melting pot, and then their traditions move forward. Well, century after century after century, it defies credulity to think that all of those traditions, all of those edicts, all of those commands were from the mouth of, or even had the heart of, Yah. And so to me, I look at it like, man, I need to investigate and see. And if something is legitimately tied back to the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, proper, so be it. I will do it, and do it wholeheartedly. But I'm not just going to believe them when they say that there are 39 commands and that I have to do all of them, or I need to do some of them, or I don't need to do any. I'm not just going to take that. Am I taking the wrong stance in your opinion? Or, am I overthinking it? Or, how would you respond to that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, we have the same thing today. What happened in the first century? I mean, we have a mixture of all kinds of different people. There's mixed believers among all different sects that we have. So, what happened then is still happening today. It's the same thing, whether you're Jew or Gentile, or think you're from one of the lost tribes or whatever. It's always a matter of the heart, of course. But as far as to really look at decisions that were made by the official Sanhedrin, you'll see that they very rarely err, and they almost always, when they do make a proclamation, they'll go too far as far as to err in safety rather than to be able to break a command. So it means that there's fences there that are put there. Sometimes they're good for a time. Sometimes they're outdated. Sometimes they need to be revised, but they're there for a reason, and yet it's not a total commandment.
Okay, right. But I guess I would say that you're missing the forest for the trees, that they have missed the biggest one, which is the prophet who is like Moses, right? So why am I going to listen to anything they say when they've missed the one that Yah said you can't miss this one? You have to listen to him.
Well, we all missed him until we find him.
Right,
I mean,
but
really.
Guess what? I wasn't trying to give you religious edicts before I had missed him. I was just being the heathen that I was, not right. I mean,
right.
I don't get to command. I give edicts from the Father's mouth when I can't even locate the prophet like Moshe, right?
Well, you have to see what Yeshua said too. He goes, the Sopharim and the Bereshim sit in the seat of Moshe. So he's saying they sit on the torch. He goes, well. But basically what he was saying is their decisions are correct, but their heart is wrong. They're hypocritical. So
I think that you're reading into him saying that their decisions are correct.
Well, he said, whatever they tell you, do and obey, which is directly from Deuteronomy 16. He goes, if there's controversy, you go to the court, they make the decisions. Now, it doesn't mean the judges are righteous in their own lives.
Well, no, I
correct decisions as a group, but they may not be obeying them.
Right. I don't. I think that there are different. Certainly, the version that we have today says he said that. There's a debate as to whether or not that's exactly what he said, and if that is what he said, then a little bit later, 100 years later, they said don't follow him as the Messiah. So you're in a conundrum either way.
Well, the Sanhedrin didn't say don't follow him. Now, there might have been first out.
Yeah, they did.
It's the same way. You can say, did the Sanhedrin, have a court and convict Yeshua? Well, there are some members there, but it wasn't a legitimate court.
Yeah, but I still say you're missing the forest for the trees there. You're pretty defensive of the Sanhedrin when they don't defend Yeshua at all and don't right that wrong, which is the biggest wrong they've done.
Well, they never made a statement. You had particular rabbis recorded being against Yeshua or statements or even Bar Kokhba saying something, but it was never a decision by the full Sanhedrin. When you read the Gemara, they bring everybody's point of view. Every sect can make his opinion, but what you have to do is you have to go back. Was it a decree or an ultimatum issued by the Sanhedrin that has to be obeyed by all? You won't find that.
So,
you'll find the opinions of rabbis who oppose them, who are allowed.
So you say that so that you could join Orthodox Judaism and believe that Yeshua is the Mashiach.
Yeah, you can. Now there are sects that will try to say, hey, if you believe you can join. But there are other sects, in fact, I know some top rabbis, who they believe that Yeshua may be the Messiah ben Yosef. So what's their opinion is? Well, if he comes as Messiah ben David, great. So we're waiting until the Messiah comes. That's their general opinion. They're not opposed to Yeshua. What they're opposed to is how the Jesus quote has been portrayed by Christianity.
Oh, sure. I'm opposed to that as well. But I've never seen anything from Orthodox Judaism that is pro-Yeshua, not one thing. And everybody who is pro-Yeshua that's in Orthodox Judaism hides it until they die. So that's an indicator to me that he is not received. And I would say that, I haven't heard that at all.
Well, if you're Jewish, you're in a conundrum because you'll have various sects will say, well, he believes in Yeshua, some of them will say he's given up Judaism or he should be excommunicated, but that's not in every sect of Orthodox Judaism. A lot of them will say, hey, well, if Yeshua was Messiah ben Yosef, great. I mean, you find that in the Gospels. You know, in John, where
Yeah, but that's
he
not the
found-
directive. Hold on, that's not the directive, though. The directive isn't, hey, if this is the guy, maybe, great, haha. The directive is listen to every word that he says, right? So if you're just agnostically saying he could be the Messiah, you are not living your life according to every word that he says. You're not challenging the tradition of the elders. You're not challenging the directive of Sabbath keeping. You're not challenging the things that he challenged. You're not looking at the different perspectives of the commandments that he gave and trying to live in a way that he showed how to live that was obviously devoid of people trying to follow the commandments in the first century in Judea. That's agnostically saying he could be and we'll see is completely different than listen to the word, every word that the prophet like Moshe says. Those are two different things, no?
Well, I agree that they need to do that. But what they're saying is if Yeshua is totally Torah observant and we're trying to observe the Torah as best we possibly can, and if he was the Messiah ben Yosef, the suffering servant Messiah, great, we're still following Torah. And if when he comes as Messiah ben David and sets up the kingdom, we'll obey. So yes, they're missing the spiritual point. They're not totally throwing in and saying, hey, you know, we know Yeshua is the Messiah. I agree with that. But what they're doing is they're saying, hey, how can we go wrong by continuing to observe God's commandments? So, you know, I realize they're coming short and not acknowledging Yeshua is the Messiah.
Sure.
And not all of them. Right.
Well, I would say this, and I've thought this for a long time. I was in discussions with a guy who was not a rabbi, but had, I think, taken the rabbinical courses. A man from Israel who I think was going to be running for the Knesset, and he was trying to convince me, you know, to let go of Yeshua. And I said, "Hey, why would I let go of the guy who led me to the Torah? Like, why would I do that?" Right? If Torah is so awesome, I wouldn't even know about Torah unless I was raised in a Protestant, you know, protesting Catholic home, was introduced to this American Western idea of Jesus and, you know, found out through growing up that he was a first century Yehudi who followed Torah, and now I follow Torah as best that I can. Why would I let go of that guy? But I do agree that I do agree with the anti-missionary stance that, you know, a Christian, quote unquote, or a Catholic that's coming in to try to sell you a Western Jesus and tell you that he did away with the law is something to be rejected. And in rejecting that idea of Jesus / Yeshua, you could actually be accepting more of the real Yeshua than meets the eye. I think probably maybe some people would have qualms with that here. I don't know, but that certainly could be the case. But I don't think, I think that the, you know, kind of the two things, Yeshua did away with the law and he's the reason we had the Holocaust. You know, that's kind of the biggest argument you get from some of these religious Orthodox Jews, and that's as far as they've studied. Then I don't know that they've done their due diligence, or if I give them that break, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Orthodox Judaism is really coming along. There's a lot more unification among them, and they're way more open than previously. And so, whether you believe in Yeshua or not, if you're trying to follow the Torah, at least apply to a Gentile, they're willing to help. They don't see, generally, don't see belief in Yeshua as, hey, we're not going to teach you, we're not going to help you with the Torah. They're seeing it as a good thing that you're coming to Torah regardless whether you believe Yeshua is the Messiah or not. And that's rapidly changing. In fact, Orthodox Judaism has basically left prophecy alone since the time of Bar Kokhba, and they're starting to come back and really reread the prophecy and taking a second look again. And
Right.
it's amazing. There's a lot of changes in Orthodox Judaism within just the last 10, 15 years. I'm amazed.
Right, and I think that they're taking that stance. And here's another, I guess, the last question, and before anyone else has it, if anyone else has a question, or if we need to wrap it up. But I think they're taking that stance to say, hey, because the prophecies do say, that the Gentiles will come and learn, at your feet. And so that's probably why they're taking that stance. My question would be, why would I try to be learning from an Orthodox Jew who doesn't believe in Yeshua as the Messiah when I can learn from a Jew who does believe that Yeshua is the Messiah?
Okay, I go both ways, because I see that Orthodox Judaism and the writings, there are some fantastic perspectives and things that we miss by not doing that. And I think most of Messianic Judaism is too far leaning towards what you would call nominal Christianity in a way. Now, great that the believe Yeshua is the Messiah. Obviously, that's number one. That's great. But I think they're not understanding some of the depth and wisdom and knowledge of the Torah from Orthodox Judaism that should be understood.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott, for letting me rapid fire at you. I appreciate it. Does anybody else have any questions or comments, or Jackson or anything?
Just excellent. I'd like to go on with this maybe next time.
Yeah, I think it's worth discussing further. I mean, we barely scratched the surface. There's so much more. And of course, I wasn't prepared at all to do anything.
Well, also, we've got really good participants on here.
Yeah, 19 people here today. Must be a topic everybody likes.
Everybody's falling asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to throw something out there. As far as the rabbinical stuff and everything that Scott's talking about, I mean, he knows so much more about me than any of that kind of stuff, so I don't really have any comments on that. But I'm looking at what he's saying and seeing whether or not, could be right. But concerning things like the Sabbath and what we were talking about earlier, another idea came up to me concerning another Sabbath, which is the Day of Atonement. And me and Scott talked about this just the other day.
Sure.
Whether or not you should fast on the Day of Atonement. And I kind of see that as, our same dilemma with, what is work is what is to afflict your soul. Well, it doesn't say fast in any of the commandments for Day of Atonement, but you can see hints of it all over the place to fast. But then again, it doesn't necessarily, even say to fast. So is fasting on the Day of Atonement, that thing for which if you do not do, you'll be cut off from your people?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'd say that fasting isn't totally what's afflicting your soul. It's just an outward expression of a way to do that. You're willing to give up something that's olam hazeh, totally on with the present age, only physical food, to concentrate on the spiritual matters. And so, more than just fasting.
Well, that would be it. But then if you throw in things like Jubilees, where it says anyone who fasts on a Sabbath, they shall surely die. Well, is that true?
No, you have to take the festivals, the Moedim, separately. So there's separate commands posed, even though the festivals are considered a Sabbath or a Shabbaton, that you're to rest, not to do customary work. And Yom Kippur is a Shabbat, but it has specific other details in that festival that you would not eat on that day. One exception.
Well, I mean, that's a question whether or not you separate them, but it does straight up call it a Sabbath. So
it is a Sabbath.
Does Jubilees apply to that? Don't fast on Sabbath. Is what Jubilee says even true? I kind of was going with what I was saying earlier about be careful to do all his commandments, where I kind of always err on the side of caution, a little bit conservative, I might say, that, if I'm not 100% sure, and the Spirit hasn't 100% convicted me of something, which I think everyone has to be individually convicted by the Spirit before they
Right.
can be convinced of a matter anyway, then if I'm not 100% sure, then I always err on the side of caution, and I'm like, well, maybe it is true. I mean, I haven't been led into all truth yet, so I can't really be the judge. That's kind of above my pay grade.
Yeah, we'll actually have to take each festival separately and obey those commands for that. Obviously, for Pesach, if there was a temple and you could offer a lamb, then you would observe that commandment. And so that Passover lamb is a shelamim, it's a peace offering, not a sin offering. But, the same way with Yom Kippur, you have all of these offerings that are done, but all of the offerings done in the temple were only for sins of ignorance and unwillful sins. Willful sins can only be forgiven through true repentance, through tshuva. And so a lot of people think, well, didn't the Torah say if you make this offering, it's an atonement for your sins? It's covering, it's temporal. Willful sins you must confess. And I think the Jewish people understood that. You can't just make an offering. Well, I made an offering for my sins. That doesn't work. I think that's why the prophets seemingly condemned a lot of the offerings, because the people's heart wasn't right. They didn't do teshuvah. They didn't do true repentance. And so your offering is worthless. Makes sense.
I think that's a great point on the willful and ignorant sins. The differentiation, because I mean that is why we have that high priest there, to cover us in those things that we weren't sure of, in those things that we weren't certain of, but we did the best with what we knew.
Well, that's true, and that's why you had offerings that were made, because they're for our sins of ignorance. And every year on Yom Kippur, an offering was made on behalf of the Sanhedrin, because if they made a decision and people followed it, because they're to obey the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin's wrong, then the Sanhedrin has to correct the decision, and they bear the guilt of making a poor decision. That offering was done every Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, also made an offering for his own sins and on behalf of the priest in making poor decisions on Halakha. When people came and asked him, what should I do? They made a mistake. The person obeying is making a mistake, but he's alleviated of the guilt or of the sin personally upon himself. It's hard to explain in a way. If you're talking about the Shabbat, I think the Nevi'im, the prophet Isaiah in chapter 58, he's explaining more about Yom Kippur. So I suggest you do a careful reading of Yeshayahu 58 as well, because he gets into, hey, the Sabbath is more than just fast, more than just not eating or drinking or just saying, hey, it's the Sabbath, I'm going to observe it. It's really about a change of heart. Tshuva. Did you really do the tshuva? Did you observe the people that need food or the hungry or those who are naked? Did you spend that time on you? It doesn't mean right on Yom Kippur take off and run out and feed the poor, because you realize, hey, I have a change of heart from this point. I'm going to observe these Sabbaths. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, it does. Very good. Okay, we're going to need to close up now. We've gone over, but we're happy to have done that. I'm glad you got your microphone together, Scott. Very enlightening. So
we barely touched on it. Yeah, let's do another session.
Okay.
And,
next
everybody.
week, 1 o'clock, please. There's some other people that want to come, but they've got congregations at 2 o'clock. So
Sure.
We'll go over to this. And I thank you all for your participation.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Also, feel free to jump in at different times. I know that some people that are normally here sometimes talk, and I don't always want to talk. So if you guys have other stuff to say, I know some of you might be saying stuff behind your muted microphone, but we want to get this going. And yeah, Scott was probably saying a bunch behind his microphone that wouldn't work today.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't get on there. You got 40 questions, and I'm trying to answer 2 out of 40.
Sure, but I would love to have you guys back next week. And anybody has any topics that they want to discuss after next week, just post them in the Yahad Think Tank, or text or message me or Jackson, and we'll try to talk about them in subsequent weeks.
Good idea.
Thank you.